If you're a North Korean news aficionado like me, you probably came across the NK News website well before discovering the podcast. It's an incredible source that gets you behind the headlines to give you what's probably the most reliable and evidence-based news on North Korea. Every business day, you'll get between 5 to 10 articles that provide exclusive news, detailed analysis, and informed opinions. And guess what? Each week they send you forward-looking week-ahead briefings and news alerts to keep you ahead of the curve. There's more. NK News members also get special reader-only benefits, access to exclusive events and online conferences, and perpetual access to our archive of podcasts. And here's the best part, you can get a $100 discount on your annual subscription with the code PODCAST. Redeem this podcast-only special today by visiting nknews.org/discount. That's nknews.org/discount. Hello listeners and welcome to the NK News podcast, and I'm sitting here in the NK News studio with Chad O'Carroll. Chad, you look a little bit worn down. You've just come back from the week-long tour North Korea from a Distance, or Seen from a Distance. What's the correct title again? I always get it wrong.
North Korea from a Near Distance.
North Korea from a Near Distance. Okay, and I was lucky enough to be there for a couple of days towards the end along the east coast there in Gosong. But for those who haven't yet been on the tour or looked through the website to see the itinerary, tell us a little bit about the tour.
Yeah, so it's the second time we've done it. We did it for the first time last late September with Greg from Choreo Tours. And the goal is really to bring people who are interested in North Korea to South Korea and take them along the InterKorean border pretty much everywhere you can reasonably go within 9 or 10 days. And I guess the key difference to some of the tours with maybe Korean companies here in Seoul, or if you to go to North Korea, is that we bring experts for portions of the tour, people who have lived in North Korea, and as a result, we're able to provide briefings on the bus, over dinner, and we bring NK News journalists along, and it's kind of like a cross between, I guess, an educational itinerary, but also one that's, I think quite fun, and also combine some really interesting trips out of Seoul to places many Koreans don't ever go to. So yeah,
right. You went to Yeonpyeong Island over there on the West Sea between Korea and China.
Yeah, and
someone found a hat there.
I think they found 2 hats there, North Korean hats that had swept in from, I guess, nearby. And then
that's a very lucky find, right? Normally, if you're beachcombing on Paengyeongdo or Yeonpyeongdo, you just find some North Korean trash, but more likely Chinese trash. But to actually find a hat, that's a rare find.
Well, there was a lot of North Korean trash there compared to my last visit. And the hats, those are things I've never seen before. One of them was definitely a military hat.
Yep.
Had a little heart sewn into the inside, which one guy I spoke to who used to live in North Korea said that's probably sewn in by a girlfriend or wife.
Right.
Interesting little touch.
Yeah.
But I mean, the main thing I'm glad about with the Yeonpyeong trip is that we got back okay, because someone who I was with yesterday told me that she went to Yeonpyeongdo in July when the heavy rains are on, and she got stuck there for 3 weeks.
Because of the weather?
Yeah.
3 weeks?
3 weeks.
On Yeonpyeongdo?
No ferries in or out.
You'd really get to know that island very well. It's not that big.
Yeah, and then 2 weeks stuck on Paengyeongdo right after, she said. Same thing.
Oh, boy.
Boats are very unreliable when the weather's bad. Luckily, the weather's been great recently here.
It has been wonderful. Yeah, September, October is generally a pretty good time to do a ferry trip out to one of those islands there. Yeah, and you also went to Choron County with a friend of the podcast, Steve Tharp.
Yeah.
Hi, Steve, if you're listening.
Yeah, I wasn't on that part, but I know Steve is great at informing people about what they're looking at in that neck of the woods. We went with him last year,
we did, that's
and
right.
We did a podcast,
yeah.
I seem to remember.
With Colonel G as well, yeah.
Yeah. So that was great fun.
What other experts did you have along on the trip this time?
Andrei Lankov came.
Mm-hmm.
None other than NK News podcast host Jacko Zvetslu came.
Yep.
Jongmin Kim came from our team. So did Anton.
Yep.
Sokolin, Shress, Reddy, Joe from our team.
Right.
And then there was Steve Tharp. there's a couple others, I can't remember whose name they were, but yeah, it was.
And the tourists themselves was a really, really interesting and eclectic mix this time, wasn't it? Of people who have long and abiding and very deep interests in North Korea. These are not just your typical punters on a tour, but these are actual people who research it or who have been there lots of times without giving away their identities. Tell us a couple of interesting things about them.
Oh yeah, we had one person who's a astronomer or astronomer or astrologist. I can't remember the name.
Astronomer and astrophysicist, I believe.
Yeah, who has a very in-depth understanding, interest in the careers. That person actually did a quick briefing for us when we were in Yeonpyeong and shared the history of astronomy-based cooperation with North Korea and also of North Korean scientific study and collaboration with foreign academic institutions. Very interesting stuff.
Yep.
We had a historian who's doing a Ph.D. up in DC, gave us a briefing about her focus area, which was also really interesting, about the role of children in North Korea.
Right, and what makes a good child to the North Korean state.
Yep.
Right.
We had a guy I know who's been to a few people that have been to North Korea multiple times.
Yeah.
Some of them, I think it was their first time doing South Korea. Yeah, so some people who I really resonated with in terms of like my own sort of story of how I got so interested in North Korea, like just going down that rabbit hole, by watching YouTube videos, reading books. There's people that really knew their stuff. So,
and there was a retired U.S. State Department diplomat with significant experience in Yemen, and I've actually encouraged him to write something to make a pitch to NK News to look at the Yemen example of unification and ultimately disunification through civil war, and what can be learned for the Korea case. Because everyone in Korea says, oh yes, you've got Germany and you've got Vietnam. These are cases of unification that ultimately were successful. Well, you've also got Yemen. There's a counterexample, and very, very little has been written about that, at least in English, comparing Yemen to Korea. So I think that could be an interesting addition.
Yeah, no, it was a great group. Lots of fun. A bit too much karaoke maybe at the end. We did like 3 or 4 sessions of noraebang late into the night. My singing skills are not very good. You can hear my voice is a bit
a little bit raspy.
Yeah. So yeah.
Do you plan to do it again next year? Or will this be an annual thing?
I hope so, yeah. We need to collaborate with Greg and figure out some new dates. But the itinerary is like a lot of the work last year was designing the itinerary, but it's kind of turnkey now. And we might need to switch up some of the experts. But yeah, it's ready to go again. And, a big topic of conversation during the trip was, is North Korea going to reopen for Western tourists or not?
Yeah.
And Andrei Lankov, our regular on the podcast, was very pessimistic about this. I spoke to some people that work in that North Korea travel industry, and one of them said that they're waiting to see, what happens. If it's not open for Westerners by next April, that will be a bad sign. But there were people that were very optimistic.
Yeah, Greg seemed quite hopeful about the chances of Western tourists going in, perhaps even before Chinese tourists. So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean,
would you like to see a combined tour, sort of North and South Korea that includes the North Korea from a near distance, but as well as North Korean elements in North Korea too?
Oh, that would be fantastic. But of course, with the way North Korea has been presenting South Korea recently, I can't imagine there would be any easy way to do that. Just recall the football match the other day. They called them
the puppets. Yeah.
The new laws on South Korean cultural products and movie consumption. Just in general, the level of tension between the Yoon Suk-yeol administration and Kim Jong Un's system, I can't imagine they would be willing to support InterKorean tourism initiatives at the moment.
No, that's probably true.
Yeah.
I think you'd have to...
logistically,
you'd have to run it as a North Korean tour first, and then not mention to the North Korean partners that you'll be going to South Korea afterwards.
Yeah, it's all complicated. I wish things could be more straightforward with the careers, but sadly,
70 years plus of complexity. It's not going to get any easier just for us, is it?
No. It keeps getting worse. Unfortunately, the It was, like 10 years ago. I remember there was a New Zealand motorcyclist who...
Oh, gosh. There's a group of them,
Gareth
wasn't there?
Morgan, yeah.
I think there's a YouTube video where
crossed over from north to south, across
Right.
Panmunjom. And then there was obviously Christine On and the...
Women Cross DMZ.
Women Cross DMZ. They did it as well.
Yeah. And I met a Russian Korean who was part of a group of, they're called Koryoin, the Russian Koreans, who drove through Russia and then through North Korea and then were allowed across the demilitarized zone into South Korea. That's an epic journey.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's ever talked about that.
Is that the Gumball Rally?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a rally. It was simply a sort of a kind of a homecoming group for some Russian Koreans. I might try to encourage her to come on the show and tell us about that sometime.
Yeah, I don't know, like if we'll see that kind of inter-Korean border crossing in future. I hope so. I hope it'd be great if they started that again. I'm sure the diplomats in Seoul would appreciate if they could go north and swerve China.
Well, yeah. And one of the interesting things I was talking about on the tour was, it must be every tour leader who works in North Korea on a tour guide. So the tour leaders are the Westerners who go in with, for example, Koryo Tours and YPT and other companies to work together with the North Korean guide. One of the greatest fears of any tour leader is that somebody may actually get injured or seriously sick, and particularly, as I found out, south of, around the Kaesong area, because in Kaesong, the phones that foreigners are allowed to have in North Korea, they don't pick up a signal. So that you can't call anyone at for example, the Friendship Hospital in Pyongyang and say, hey, we've got a guy with a broken leg here. And of course, in Kaesong, you're much closer to South Korea, but there's no way you could get a sick or injured person across the demilitarized zone into South Korea. So Kaesong remains a bit of a black hole in terms of telecommunications. Now, North Korean phones, they have a different cellular network for the North Koreans. Their phones will work all over the country. But your foreigners who have phones, their SIM cards won't pick up a tower. I
actually got the North Korean. I did a network search yesterday when we were at Kangwa Observatory or Kyodong Island as well. I managed to pick up Koreolink, but couldn't obviously join the network.
Right.
Tried to get the iPhone to add it, but it just...
That's the link still run by the Egyptian company Orascom, isn't it?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was. I was lucky to see a couple of days of that tour and to get a chance to meet some of the tourists. Fascinating group, and I do hope it goes ahead again next year. To our listeners, we'll definitely be advertising the tour next year if it does go ahead, and you'll find it on the NK News website as well. That's North Korea from a near distance. Chad, let's also quickly talk about a story that you did manage to find time, I don't know how, but you did write a story during the tour on the possibility of Hamas having used North Korean weapons in their attack on Israel the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think I wrote this last Wednesday or Thursday. Basically, the Israeli Defense Forces did a media dump on Twitter of pictures of shells and other arms that they had seized from Hamas invaders, I guess.
Yeah.
And we weren't strictly the first to pick up on this, but we spoke to Joost Olymans, who is you've interviewed before on the podcast.
That's right.
Author of
a very excellent book, very graphic, lots of pictures in their book on the North Korean People's Army.
Yeah, a very authoritative guide to North Korean military. And he said, that when you look at these pictures taken by the IDF, plus one by an individual Ynet Israeli journalist, that there was one weapon there that looked highly likely manufactured by North Korea, which was
it's a rocket-propelled grenade of some sort.
Yeah, exactly. RPG-7. So North Korea produces a wide range of these rocket-propelled grenades for the RPG-7. And there's this F7 variant it makes, which has a red band around it, like a red kind of coloured band around the top. That is a distinctive indicator that it's from North Korea. Now, we don't know 100%, but there were photos of Hamas, I guess, military representatives also holding these on their shoulder, coming from Hamas-sourced propaganda, and that they also had that red band on them.
Now, North Korea has been quite strong and vociferous in its denial, saying that we didn't sell or give weapons to Hamas. Why do you think they're so strongly? Well, I mean, assuming that it isn't true, why would it bother North Korea to be suspected of that?
Well, they've been very vociferous against claims that they're exporting weapons to Russia, even as evidence has been building up on that front. And on this one, I think it's actually probably true, that they have not been directly supplying Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
So there was when you're reading North Korean state media, you've got foreign ministry statements, you've got Kim Jong Un. There's a whole level, and the statement was published by a named columnist. I think it was, but it wasn't very high level. And this person really took issue with the claims, talking about fake media organizations, quasi-experts, spreading baseless rumors that North Korean weapons were being used in Hamas's attack. Yeah, the thing I guess that could be true is that I don't think North Korea is supplying these directly. What Olimans told me when I spoke to him about this last week was that the weapons were likely... There's a lot of vintage North Korean RPG munitions within the Middle Eastern area. They had a lot of climbing.
When you say vintage, you mean they've been making this stuff for years?
Yeah. I mean, this is really old stuff.
Yeah.
And North Korea was transparently selling arms to many countries in the Middle East for a long time.
Syria, Iran. I don't think they have any issues with that being named.
Yeah, exactly. Egypt. And so
Egypt too.
Yeah. So Joost Olimans thought it was very likely that these munitions might have gone to one of those countries first, and then Hamas acquired them from one of those countries.
We know that Hamas has ties with Iran, so it's not difficult to imagine that North Korea sold or traded these red-banded RPG projectiles to Iran, and then Iran simply shipped them on to Hamas. That's not a difficult thing to imagine, right? I mean, we're seeing the same thing happen in the Ukraine war, that weapons are ending up in the hands of the Ukrainians that have come from other sources.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's, definitely possible. Yeah, I think it's going to be very hard to prove one way or the other, but we should keep an eye out for more North Korean weapons being used by Hamas. So one of the other types that they have, according to Olimans and his co-author Steen Mitzer, the guys that wrote The Armed Forces of North Korea.
Hello, Joost and Stan, if you're listening.
Yeah, so Hamas apparently also has these Bullseye 2 anti-tank guided missiles. And of course, North Korea hosted a Palestinian ambassador or representative until just 2 years ago.
He was there for over a decade, wasn't he? He was there a long time.
He was the dean of the diplomatic community, and then when he left, it became the Syrian ambassador. So, yeah, North Korea does have long ties with Palestine.
And expressed support, I think, for Palestine in the last week or two, didn't they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that's been interesting is South Korea picked up on South Korea's defense minister used Hamas's attack on Israel to sort of warn South Koreans that we could face something a lot worse in South Korea if North Korea ever wanted to launch a surprise attack. In fact, he said that North Korea can fire up to 16,000 rounds in an hour from its multiple rocket launchers, which would be a significant amount more than what Hamas was doing. That's, according to Yang Ark from the Asan Institute, sort of the upper end of the estimations of North Korean capabilities. But I thought this had been used a little... I don't know. I thought it was a little manipulative of him to state this and then say this is why we need to disband the comprehensive military agreement with North Korea, because it excessively restricts our reconnaissance capabilities near the border. I mean, I really don't know I don't think that having reconnaissance capabilities within that area that was agreed would give you significant heads up on an incoming attack of this scale. And he was also critical of Israel for their intel capabilities missing Hamas's attack, which I also thought was a little unfair. I would guess, and this could upset some people, that Israel has better intel capabilities than North Korea. So I think it was just a good sign of how...
better than North Korea or better than South Korea?
Sorry, South Korea, yeah. That's my feeling anyway.
Okay, well, that's a good place to leave it there. I'm thinking of adding the title quasi-expert to my LinkedIn profile. I think that's a good idea.
yeah, maybe Joost can as well, because I guess he's one of the folks that they took issue with. But yeah, interesting times. Let's just hope this Israel-Hamas situation doesn't blow up too much more and lead to a World War III in the Middle East. I
it's very grim stuff.
It is.
Yeah. All right, listeners, stay with us, because after this break, I'll have a long interview with Tatiana Gabroussenko about media developments in North Korea since the arrival of Kim Jong Un on the scene. So
I'll be listening to that. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Chad.
Thank you.
Attention, North Korea portfolio professionals. Are you in need of more than just sloppy and spotty South Korean news coverage on the DPRK? If so, I present to you NK Pro. Born from the established news-gathering reputation of NK News, NK Pro leverages staff experience and top-notch technology to provide subscribers with superior knowledge and tools to achieve their goals. Expect daily analysis, exclusive tools, and a suite of research tools that cover everything from North Korean state media to the whereabouts of DPRK vessels and aircraft. How cool is that? In a world where the landscape of North Korea seems unknowable to many, NK Pro cuts through the noise and provides you with the quality, reliability, and timeliness you need. Stay ahead, stay informed, and master the landscape with NK Pro. Trust me, it's a game changer. Interested? Visit nknews.org/professionals to claim your free 30-day trial of NK Pro. Once again, that's nknews.org/professionals. For this week's long interview, I'm joined in the studio by Dr. Tatiana Gabroussenko. Tatiana obtained her Ph.D. in East Asian Studies at the Australian National University, and she's a professor of North Korean Studies at Korea University, and once taught me when I was a student at Korea University. She appeared on episodes 47 and 211 of this podcast, so if you're interested, you can go back and listen to them, where we talk about North Korean cultural production. Welcome back on the show, Tatiana.
Hello.
It's been a long time. So first of all, most of your academic work, you focus on North Korean literature, North Korean film, North Korean cultural production, but you also study North Korean media. Why is that?
Because I think in North Korean context, this is inseparable entity. Media is closely connected with culture, and culture is the part of the media. That's why I think it's to understand the trends, cultural trends or trends in music, whatever, you have to understand the media, of course, the way which media moves. And in North Korea, cultural work, be it films or lengthy novels or historical sagas, they all are part of media politics, media policy. So that's why I think I found it necessary to follow these trends as well.
Okay, now when we talk about media in North Korea, obviously they have newspapers, they have some TV stations, some radio stations. Is there anything else? Am I missing anything?
I think no, but the thing is, it's just the same where it was, but so using the same common media tools, but now they play more with the forms and new genres and the variety of programs, etc., etc.
Yes,
and of course they also change focus from generation to generation, from decade to decade. They change focus onto one tool to another one. If, for example, during Kim Il-sung's time, propaganda was mostly text-focused, text-oriented, with radio being only the additional and not very important part of this, not to say television, because television airing was very, very short. It touched only brief short periods of time, and of course there was no internet and the other forms. Now the next tendency under Kim Jong Un, we see more focus on visual images such as films, artistic and documentary and fiction, etc., more on artistic forms, not just direct media, but the media in more creative forms, so to speak, but more visual, focus on visual images, on visual media, and also on audio media as well, in terms of new propaganda songs, new propaganda things, etc., etc. So actually, if you trace the development of North Korean media, or just the statements in North Korean leading newspapers such as Nodon Sunmun, you can see exactly the same trends, how they repeated in the works of art, etc. So And now we see the new generation, the new turn, the new twist of media when, in addition to the previous propaganda forms, now you see more focus on more pioneering trends, which are strongly influenced by comics or just comics, animations, or by internet and social media of the West, etc., and South Korea, of course. So that's what you see. But what is interesting in North Korea, what makes this media situation a little bit atypical, because despite all these talks about revolution in North Korea, revolution is permanent in North Korea, as we know, it never stops. But what is interesting, you never see a radical discard of the previous forms. So now, for example, in today's media, you see the forms which were similarly popular during Kim Jong Un's time, Kim Il-sung's time, and Kim Jong Il's time. You don't see the radical discard of these forms of media. So, for example, some things, some forms of propaganda, some forms of media look extremely outdated and strange to the contemporary audience. For example, now you see lots of books which are published in North Korea, books which have in electronic format as well, not only in paper form. Yep. So very big books about about activity of Kim Jong Un. So something that you would not expect in today's world. When you would expect from probably some forms of propaganda, of propagation of the greatness of the leader, but you now see the same forms of things augmented with the new modern forms which we see in today's media, with the short, brief forms, etc. So the old forms coexist with the new forms.
Right. Okay. So in general, how much time do you spend each week looking at North Korean media?
Actually, I try to do it every day. I try to look through the majority of materials every day. But the thing is that many of this available media now repeat one each other. But still, just the new information, the new materials, they do not appear regularly. So you just have to hunt over just after the new things, after the new material. That's what I try to do. And also my other source, which I explore for about 10 years already, this is YouTube channels. Because in YouTube channels you can find new and newer forms of North Korean propaganda, which are hunted, of course, by censorship committee or whoever exists on YouTube. They disappear, and the next day they could pop up with the new forms, etc. So I try to do it on regular basis, practically every day or the day after, so something like this, to search for something new.
So Kim Jong Un's been in charge in North Korea for over 11 years now, and as you mentioned, that broadly speaking, the same types of media that existed under his father and his grandfather still exist under Kim Jong Un, but with some small trends or changes in trends, right?
Not only with addition of the new forms. That's important thing. Addition. It's just to say that the media become more versatile, and the very amount is bigger than it existed before. So in addition to the old journals, old channels, etc., you have new forms. For example, you see the long programs devoted to some political issue, to some political agenda, but at the same time you see very brief TikTok style or Instagram style kind of media.
Is it on television or the internet?
On television. They use this on television. Of course, we do not know what North Koreans show on their intranet, but you can guess, you can have some guesses of intranet when looking watching North Korean contemporary films. They are normally short. The films are shorter fiction. It's just about 25 minutes. They prefer to do it shorter. But during this short film forms, you see how the characters play with intranet, and you can have a snitching look at what they actually watch, what they're interested in. So you can have some idea of what is the internet is. But overall, the materials which are available to us, they are of course on television on these forms. Yes, these forms probably used between news pieces of news, etc., etc. Some of them, they are constructed as the columns kind of things, like CPRO materials, for example, or the other forms which are narrate about some issues, social issues, or about some people, propagate some people, or talk about some historical things, etc. So there are lots of them.
Yeah, okay. I've got some questions to get into them, so let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Now, the North Korean newsreader, Ms. Ri Chun-hee, often dressed in a pink jogori, is a very familiar face and voice to people both inside and outside North Korea. Has the last decade seen new faces in North Korean media? Are there new rising stars in news reading or presenting TV programs?
Yes. And again, this policy of announcers, the policy of media people in North Korea is just following this general policy of keeping the old things with the new one, augmenting the old things with the new one. So that's what we see, that, for example, Ri Chun-hee recently become the protagonist of one media report when the leader presented her a special, very spacious and very comfortable apartment in the new, very modern, very stylish houses in Pyongyang. And he not only gives this to her as a present, but he takes her by hand and he led her to this apartment, which was fully furnished, and showed her around, like as if she is a guest. So this is very family style scene which we saw, because he acted like a grandson who takes care of his grandmother. And actually, the news were that she actually quit her job now. She is retired, but which is not true, because we see her face. We still see her, especially at the moments when some important news are announced. But at the same time, we see many new faces on North Korean programs. Unfortunately, in new reports, normally they don't have the names of people. Often they don't mention the names, but these are very young, handsome faces. Many of them are dressed in new contemporary clothes, not in Choson-ot or Hanguk, so not Hanbok or Choson-ot. So they are dressed in the new fashionable clothes in very bright colors. The bright colors are the feature of just special feature of Kim Jong Un's time, because everything is so colorful around. So the way how the architecture is organized, how people dress, they use all this very pinkish, mintish color, very bright one. But it's not only about their clothes, but about the manner how they present the materials. The materials become more natural. The voices are natural. Sometimes when they make mistakes, they do not correct it. Sometimes you see this. And the same can be said about the people whom they interview. If in the previous North Korean video materials, you could see the people who speak apparently some words which they learned by heart, speak in special intonation, which is easily recognizable with this hole at the end. So with the hands around and something like this. Now you see very natural speaking people. Their faces are not photoshopped. Their movements are not often not corrected. They behave very natural. They can make mistakes. Their skin have imperfections. That's something very, very natural feeling of that. But in addition to that, we see some new film stars, relatively new, I'm saying, about people who emerged in North Korean filmmaking around Kim Jong Un's time. So a decade ago, for example, Kang Il-sim. Kang Il-sim, she was the star of a North Korean TV drama for kids about the ex-football player, a woman who became a coach of the local team, boys team. So She was Kan Il-sim, her name was. But now, because probably in North Korea they have fewer fiction film produced, Kan Il-sim now occupies a very important role as the media person. So she is the announcer of some such programs as culinary shows or travel logs, traveling around Korea, lots of things which we see. And in terms of Kan Il-sim, one thing which grasped my attention, her facial features. I'm not saying that she's unpretty, of course, but her facial features are lots like Japanese like. So it's a sharp, quite big nose, which is atypical for Korean presenters, So she is, and quite closely stood eyes, etc. So her face is, again, not to say that she is not pretty, but her beauty standards are much closer to the Japanese rather than to North Korean. And the same can be said about the other actresses who are popular now. They also have this big nose.
Wow.
Just a typical feature of this a little bit alien style of the star. But she's apparently very popular because she's not only announcing, but she participating in programs, etc. Very fashionably dressed and perfect dress, very slim. Again, this is a new feature because North Korean, for quite a long time, women did not follow this trends of extreme slimness.
Right.
But her body is very small, very she's very thin. So that's what we see. That's what I can say. So we see the variety of announcers, just bigger variety of people than they existed before.
And what about the way that Kim Jong Un and his family are portrayed and presented in the media? Has that changed also?
I also could say that they changed, but not to the big extent, but some details I found them important. For example, one thing is that if we compare Kim Jong Un's communication, the way how he communicates with people, if you compare this with how his father and grandfather are portrayed, normally they carried a very wild smile, probably not only to show their love to people or their satisfaction about things around, but just they carried this atmosphere of general happiness, of harmony, everything is good, etc., etc. The new leader is different. In one terms, he does not scare of appearing in bad mood, for example. Very often he can smile, sometimes he can hug, he can laugh, and sometimes he behave in a very natural, very natural way, when he pokes fun, when he do this. But at the same time, media often show him as very unhappy. For example, a few years ago, I think it was in 2021, when North Korea had problems with construction of the big hospital, and it was the problem which were ascribed, at least explained, by some bad work of managers of this construction site. And media often show him as very unhappy, as the person who's not nice, who's not nice, and people around are not nice. Also, the other thing, and in the same situation, you can find him when, for example, there are some cases of bad harvest. For example, when the big harvest and floods, and you see him very unhappy, very angry, frustrated, stood at the edge of the field and very angry at these people. So this is something which you could not imagine in previous North Korean portrayals of the leader. But apart from that, his clothes, of course, has changed radically to what you see in with the case of his father and grandfather. He can wear suits, normal Western suits, like we see him with, for example, when he met with Putin, he wears a normal Western suit. But in addition, he apparently likes white color. White color, exactly like his wife. When they appear together on the screen, they always are wearing white clothes. And I think this probably, it's a far-going, it's not just a personal taste, but probably some far-going symbolism here, because this Korean attitude to white color, you know, it's a respectful, very respected attitude. The same can be said, for example, about him who's riding horses. Yeah. Horses are also white. Also bring us back to this revolutionary mythology of his grandfather Kim Jong Un, etc., etc. So this is what we can say about him. So this different color. Also, he often emerges in some minor enterprises, you know, just minor businesses, for example, like socks, just sock factory, or one of his apparently favorite idea, probably something, his pet idea, it was Mendeley notebooks, which North Korean media made a big fuss of, because they told about this Mendeley, it's a flower, and that was the notebooks made for kids, you know, for kids. So him visiting the factory during its construction, then him visiting the factory when he watching through the materials which they produce, etc. Lots of materials was apparently his pet product. Something which carries very personal light and a very funny and nice and very human-like image of the leader. Because why the leader of the nation, the leader of the country, who is scared of as the nuclear weapon source, why he's so interested in this tiny little notebook or children's socks, or him visiting this very serious phase, by the way, when he visits Korean orphanages and tries the seats on which kids sit, or tries the backpacks, etc. It's tiny little things, but probably this is something which has some positive, hot, warm feeling carries good feeling to North Korean audience.
And certainly there's been a lot of international and South Korean attention on Kim Jong Un portrayed as a family man. I mean, Kim Jong Il didn't appear with his wives or children in public, but Kim Jong Un is, he's there with his wife. He's there sometimes with his sister, sometimes with his daughter, more frequently with his daughter. Do you see any significance in that?
I think, again, very often we can explain that this is a special political game, etc. Probably it is a political game, but I found that that's how I explain the things. In North Korea, a leader doesn't have to prove anything to his nation. We have to remember one thing. So in some aspect, we can say that the leader is very free. So he doesn't have to play with the spheres and some sympathies, because his sympathies, they are already won. So I can say that all the three North Korean leaders, they just did what they wanted. And if we see at Kim Jong Il, his father, who was very well known as a womanizer leader, so the leader who was always around beautiful actresses, etc., etc. So in North Korean propaganda, in North Korean media, it was very typical to see him around the girl-only military unit, for example, on Persimmon Union. That was a famous topic of North Korean media. Or him around the female swimmers in the new swimming pool, when the girls wearing in tight swimming pool stand, he's surrounded by pretty girls like that. So this is something that he liked, I think. That's what. But you don't see him much around children. Probably he was not, and from what we know about him, he was not very good father. Kim Jong-il. But this leader, what is interesting, that the first steps of his promotion campaign or of his media images were always they began with the image of children. That was really, really interesting, that the first propaganda of him as the father of the nation emerged first in children's literature. In Haeparagi, so it's sunflower, it's a special cereal which is produced in North Korea it's just the choice works produced by children. So children's literature produced by children.
Yeah.
And in these works you see some poems, or you see some short fiction, short stories devoted to our grandfather Kim Jong Un. It was natural for the time, because he was a very young leader, and you would not expect the older people who would call him this way, so it looked natural. And at first it looked like a wise political step. But it never stopped on that, because his first propaganda, widely propagated just media steps, were always around children. So Kyonson Yuchiwon. So this is the special kindergarten for talented kids. Not only this kindergarten was widely propagated in North Korea, but there were lots of works produced, works of fiction, TV serials produced, which was centered around these talented piano players, or some talented young scientists, etc. So everything always around the kids. So I think that my suggestion is that he probably likes kids, and we know him as a very doting father. Yeah. He loves his children. He is very into his children. And so that's why not only children became important part of his political agenda, but also one of his first steps were the changes in North Korean education system. So in making it closer to the education system in the other countries, in the Western world, etc. He apparently is more interested in kids. And the same can be said about light industry enterprises. Many of them were around new shoes, new backpacks, new socks for kids, etc. I think he's just interested in that.
Yeah.
And so, of course, this is that's a case when his personal inclinations became a part of big media campaign, became the part of his big media images, etc., etc.
Well, how is South Korea now represented in North Korean media? Has that changed during Kim Jong Un's time as well?
I would say yes. From what I can say, that on the one hand, we see lesser usage of the word tonil, so unification. And apparently, North Korean media under Kim Jong-il, which was under the spell of the Sunshine Policy, and the expectations were then, now is just wait a little bit and we will unify it, we will be together. So only after we remove some separate bad guys from our way, Korea will be the same. Lots of very interesting works were written about that, etc. What can we see now? We see that North Korea seems to come in terms with the idea that unification is something to be very far from them. It's like heaven for Christians. Yeah. So you will be there one day, but when, you don't know. Yeah. So this is the idea of heaven, Christian heaven. That's what it is. But in a real life attitude, it is the increased criticism. So, and though the official and North Korean presentation of South Korea tried to keep within one line, so we criticize the leaders, what we do not criticize people. Yeah. But sometimes, and it was quite the principle which was very strictly kept under Kim Jong-il, but not under Kim Jong-un, because now apparently the makers of this new propaganda, they can't hold from the criticism of the regular people as well, because they understand, probably the understanding came that without support of the local population, without support of people, you can't support the leaders or the managers of this society. They enjoy support. So this is something that they say. And that's why in the new North Korean media materials related to South Korea, you see lots of criticism aimed at the mores of South Korean society in general. For example, their preference to Konglish, so their preferences, lots of Korean comic stand-ups, for example, they are devoted to the words of South Korean language, which are very influenced by English, so the words which you do not understand, which a normal person would not understand. Yes. And very often the characters, the judges of which language is good and which is not, serve the compatriots of Korea living in Canada, for example, or in other countries. They come to North Korea, they understand every single word. But when they come to South Korea, nothing is understood. The language is so different, and the way how people dressed, how people, the haircuts, etc., the Morse is so bad. And also the other part is that now they try to inspire, still despite the fact that they understand, the understanding is felt from these works that South Korean leaders and South Korean nation have at least some points in common, which they share. Also, they keep the same policy of support of any social unrest in South Korea. So every time when they see any demonstrations or happen to come to know about any demonstrations, they get very excited about this, and they expect, probably the expectations which they try to heat up, it's the expectation of revolution in South Korea the next day. There were lots of talks about Park Geun-hye. Yes, Park Geun-hye's this case with Park Geun-hye. It was a typical case when North Koreans expected that something the next day will uproot all this vicious government, and they will join us, rush to the bosom of the great leader. But it never happens, of course. But the funny thing is that and that's actually this desire, this happiness, in this joy in their voices when they inform about social unrest in North Korea and some disturbances, it's so visible. And I'm sure that it diminishes the efficiency of their propaganda.
Yeah.
Some of these messages are really, really funny. For example, during I think it happened a few months ago, or probably last year, I don't remember exactly. It was the case when in South Korea, because of some accident, there was the helicopter collapsed. 4 people died. So this was, as we know, as people who live in the contemporary world, we know that it's a common thing, things happened like that.
Right.
But North Korean propaganda, North Korean media were very happy, and they say that it's all because of this corruption in South Korean government, that's because of this lack of social order, so turn over your government against your government.
Wow.
So it's of course it was a funny thing, and especially providing the language of this propaganda, because the language, the way how they call to helicopter, they call it chuksungi, which is North Korean word.
Right.
lots of messages like that, they do not reach South Korean audience because of this completely unrealistic expectations.
I'm also interested in how representations of the Korean War have changed in North Korea. Have you seen any new developments there?
I think that there were some trends in change, trends of changes in this presentation. Happened first in 2012 when they produced a film about Korean War, which was focused on the story of separated lovers. A woman stayed in the north, and the man in the south, I think, and then after all these years, they met, they hugged, but she died because of some illness or something like this. So what we see in this film, what makes this film very special? The film was filled with this pacifist intonation that's emphasizing that the war is unhappy occurrence. The war, it's about blood and victims and all the separated families, etc., etc. It's not about this epic story of victory of our glorious leader over these vicious enemies, like it used before. So the same idea was promoted in this song, which was issued in 2015 or 14. It was called 3 Years of War. Interesting part of this change in narrative was, again, focused not on heroism, not on the victory, not on this thing, but on all this blood and unhappiness, etc., etc. Again, this was very, very new, because if we look at the way how North Korean narrative of Korean War formed, it can bring us back to 1950s, when many famous writers, they were punished for their war-phobic moods. That's how it was. But what we see now, it was a typical war-phobic works, because apparently after listening to this song or watching this film, you would not take the gun and begin to fight against them. But the standards stopped very quickly. And there is the trend of North Korean media. You can't not be for sure that it will be permanent. So the trend was curbed after 2015, and now you see some new, some restoration of the old norms. Again, very victorious mood, happy mood, etc., etc. So no war-phobic. So I think that this is something that North Korean culture people, so those who make culture, they understood the danger of such scar literature, scar attitude to the things. Mm-hmm.
Now, some people in North Korea, especially in Pyongyang, they have money. These are the so-called donju. They've become a bit more consumerist over the years. Is this portrayed negatively in North Korean media?
Yes, but these people actually, what is interesting about North Korea, because they try to downplay this image of these people completely. They try to downplay, but sometimes, time to time, you see some criticism over people who think too much about these material issues, but never, in no work of today, in no just fiction or film, I could find the work of Donju, the image of Donju at all. These people do not exist. The other part is, and apparently because North Koreans understand that probably the public attitude to these people can't be positive, like it always happened. But North Korean media tried to keep this mood under control, and one of the things which they learned very well, I think that's the lesson of the post-Soviet Russia, when many people were irritated by this active propagation of this Epicurean attitude to life, to this materialism,
consumption.
Yes, all this consumption, so you can buy whatever you want if you have money, etc. In North Korea, they promote consumerism widely now, but this consumerism is and they also had some ads in North Korea. They have ads, but
on television.
Yes, on television, but they are a little bit, hidden as just information pieces. They say this information about some services or a restaurant or whatever. But what is interesting about this consumerism, that consumerism keeps to be very socialist speaking. So it's very inclusive. So it means that they don't want to show, for example, that some product or some service needs some money. That's a very important thing. They don't emphasize how much it costs. And the implications are that everybody can afford it. And when they portray the consumers, happy consumers of some restaurants or some services or some products, they portray people of different status, of different generation, of different age, etc. And this makes North Korean propaganda, North Korean advertising very, very special. So apparently they are scared of get rid of all this socialist rhetoric, of this socialist propaganda, and turn to completely embrace the capitalism fully. They do not embrace it, apparently. The other thing is that their advertising doesn't exploit human vices, so to speak. So they, for example, they never show, when they show some product, some tasty food, they never show a person who would enjoy it by himself. You can you see, for example, a grandmother who buys this to her children, to her grandchildren, or the husband and wife who enjoy some food together, or the group of students, or the group of workers, etc. It's not very common people, very inclusive kind of propaganda. No idea of individualism, no idea of greed, no idea of capitalism at all. Wow. Capitalism is still a very bad word. So that's an important thing.
Advertising without capitalism, that's very interesting.
Yes.
So far, we've talked only about, or mainly about, North Korea's internal media, so messaging aimed at its own people. But North Korea has external media too, propaganda aimed at foreigners in China and in other countries in English, and propaganda also aimed specifically at South Koreans and Koreans in the wider global diaspora. So can you tell us something about propaganda aimed firstly at non-Koreans? What changes have you seen in external-facing propaganda aimed at non-Koreans?
Non-Koreans in North Korea, they are not a significant part of today's propaganda. The only cases, the only cases, the only media which are aimed at foreigners, it's still some Korea Today, the journals like Korea Today, or some Foreign Trade, or the other journals in English. But they still consist of very dense texts, and though they contain more pictures, but still the dense texts, they don't have any special messages aimed at specifically non-Korean audiences, just for foreigners, in general foreigners are the objects.
But we do see videos on YouTube in English and even some in Russian, and some videos on the Chinese version of YouTube in Chinese aimed at that audience.
They portray, but normally they include foreigners in some, for example, again, some consumerist kind of media materials. For example, typical were the images of the foreigners who enjoy InterKorean resort, or some foreign kids who go to Sodonwon, summer camp and enjoy life here. So most of them are Russians, I suspect. So this is the image of foreigners who enjoy something that Korea presents to them. So that's what it is. No, not much. They're not a focus group, not a target audience of there. But most propaganda aimed at foreigners, it's still aimed Koreans. I think it's Koreans because the idea still is that Korea will unify one day under the auspices of North Korea. And so these foreign competitors, they're welcome to join this future heaven of Koreans on earth. So they portray themselves as a still socialist country, but with the which implies free medical service, free and good 12-year education. People who also, the idea which they consistently emphasize, the idea of collectivism, and love and care for every member of the society. One of the issues which they include apparently with having in mind a foreign audience, it was the idea of extremely humane treatment of people with disabilities. And that was the issue which North Koreans promoted since 1990s, but now you see that this part of North Korean media expanded, because if before you could see only people whose disability were related to some accidents during military services, so Yonye Kunin or disabled veterans, now you see this media also include the people who have inborn disabilities, who have disabilities due to some accidents, production, or some, for example, some girl who, one of the recent things which came to, which I found, they was the woman who jumped from parachute, just parachute jumper, and she received some disability due to that. And
so this is in propaganda aimed at foreigners or aimed at Koreans?
It's also aimed at foreigners. Okay. So all these ideas, they promoted to the foreigners as well. So how happy they are. And one of the recent radio plays portrayed as Toneri Meari, so the echo of unification. That is the channel.
Right. That's the name of a YouTube channel and a website. Am I right?
I think yes. I have it as a special videos as the channel. They have special channel for that. So this one of the radio plays, recent radio plays, were about the foreign competitors came from Canada who visit North Korea, and the thing which they found very surprising is the marriage between a disabled person and the healthy girl.
Yeah, it's always a disabled man and a healthy woman, isn't it?
No, it's always in North Korea. It's very balanced image. Yes, okay. It's in this case, this is the man who's disabled and the girl who is not.
Right.
But very, very often, it's very balanced, gender balanced picture. Yes, so the girls who are disabled, they also are entitled to some care and happy family life.
Okay, you just mentioned Tongire Meori, and there's also Nenara and Chosone Onul, and of course the very famous one, Uri Minjokkiri, that we sometimes write about them here at NK News. And then there are, we mentioned already, YouTube channels. North Korea is active on Flickr, on Twitter, on the Chinese Youku, and Instagram. So they really have a lot of channels to present information to Koreans. And how successful or unsuccessful are these attempts to reach South Koreans and the Korean diaspora?
You know, this I can't answer this to you 100% because to me this propaganda looked quite funny because it demonstrates lots of misunderstanding and lots of lacuna in knowledge about the life around. Lacuna, not only the life of understanding of life in South Korea, but also in the world around, because some of the wonder things which they are proud of themselves, they exist in the other countries, and they're very nonchalant things. It's nothing special. So this lacuna exists, but again, this is my opinion. I don't have statistics about this, but what I found myself was which was the big surprise to me, that I found that some propaganda, some media, which I personally found very funny and improbable and unpersuasive, some things were met very differently by South Korean audience. What, for example,
is it based on the comments under the YouTubes?
No. Yes, comments on YouTube, again, they're not very objective because we don't know who wrote it. But I noticed this when I communicate with my South Korean students or the other people or my colleagues. Sometimes I found that they find some deeper things or some attractions in North Korean media. Some messages they found very interesting or attractive, appealing. So,
but does that mean that they want to unify with North Korea immediately, or
no? They just say that this is, I would like to live in a society like that. It's something like that. I hear it sometimes.
Wow.
Yes, of course, I do not know what is inside a person's mind, but still the idea that people do not laugh loudly at all these things, but they listen carefully and they are touched by that. That was the idea which I encountered first many years ago when in 1980s I listened to Kot Panantonio, so the flower-selling girl, in Bolshoi Theater in Moscow. And that was my favorite story because to me it looked like completely funny performance, which is such a kitsch, but people around, most of whom were Soviet Koreans, they all cried. And apparently I understand that I misunderstood something.
Right.
Yes, so this is difficult to understand, whether it can reach the people's heart or not. Do people believe in that or not? It's difficult to say. But at least what I can say, I see that many North Korean efforts, propaganda efforts, they are diminished by this lacuna of knowledge in life of South Korea. For example, one of the radio play recently telling us about South Korean mother who gave birth to twins and she killed her children, two children, because she could not have enough money to invite doctor to their feverish child. So because she saw, and between when she was thinking about what to do with these kids, she complained to her mother, and her mother is South Korean. Her mother said, but you're not in North Korea where everything is free. So this is such an obvious propaganda. You don't need any deep knowledge, but you understand that it's really, really funny. And of course, it's a big misunderstanding that this medical services in South Korea are not hopeless at all. It's not USA. It's good service. And of course, even if you can't invite kids to your feverish child, you can bring the child to this closest doctor, etc. So all these things, they demonstrate lack of knowledge, but North Koreans are improving. That's what I want to say. Say that because what we can say that despite the fact that the majority of the population are prohibited, they just have this iron curtain between them and the world outside. They can't watch videos on YouTube, etc. People who are involved in making this silly radio plays, they know the things. And so that's why the topics of criticism of South Korea mostly coincide with what South Koreans tell about themselves. And many of these motifs are quite realistic and coincide with what South Koreans criticize in their own society.
So you would say that despite the obvious gaps in their knowledge and their lacunae in their awareness of the outside world, actually propaganda in North Korean media has learned from past mistakes and it's more media savvy now under Kim Jong Un.
Sure. They continue to do this all the time. They work it, and apparently they're tracing over the reaction of the world. That's it completely. It's completely clear. For example, at first, when you see the photos of Kim Jong Un in Nodon Shinmun, you would see some of them are very funny. Some of them are very funny when he was portrayed as sitting at a squatting on this edge of the field as if making a poo or something like this. Lots of memes were spread all over internet, etc. Or how he's just greedily looking at some cookies made for and again lots of memes. Apparently, all these memes, all these jokes of the world, they're traced carefully by North Korean media makers, media people who are involved in media politics, and I understood, for example, that some of them disappear completely. So apparently,
the people do, or the pictures do.
Yes, they not people disappear. I mean, just this policy changed, and so the pictures like that they continue. There were some flash of the silly photos of him standing around the mushrooms, for example, with a silly smile. So all these photos were widely spread on internet. People were making fun, etc. So, but you see that after a while, you don't see these photos anymore. You see that he is apparently the photographer. I don't know if he was punished or not, but anyway, the works like that do not disappear, do not appear anymore. Apparently, they learn from that. Yeah. They learn from their own mistakes, and the other stuff as well. So you could see that some unsuccessful media steps of North Korea, they are curbed and they change the trend.
So there must be somewhere in North Korea, probably in Pyongyang, there must be several hundred North Korean people who have access to global media, global internet, YouTube, Twitter, memes, blogs, looking at these things, tracing these things, learning from it, and using it to modify North Korea's propaganda messages, right? That must be a group of people who are very trusted or very, very carefully monitored, I guess.
Yes, I think it's both trusted and monitored, but there is the third part, they're very well paid. That's an important thing, that people who are involved in media making in North Korea, they are elite of elite. It's creme de la creme of North Korean society. And my own experience of communicating with some people, of some journalists in North Korea, my own opinion was very high on them. They're very educated people. They're very well looking, very well mannered. They're just like diplomats, that's in the best part. So this is the thing. And another thing is that this is not the idea of this trusty people to be exposed to this foreign media. It's not new in North Korea. It's not a part which began only in Kim Jong Un's time. When we look at the way how media was made under Kim Il-sung, we already saw this, the same tendencies. For example, if you would be an author of North Korean historical saga, for example, or some historical text about something, you have an opportunity to visit archives. You have the opportunity to see the foreign media, and that's why, for example, some people were so informed about this situation with kidnapping of Kim Dae-jun or something like that. They have tiny little details all are reproduced here. Apparently, they know a lot about this because they are exposed to them. They have some access to these materials, factual materials, so they don't lie about this. Yeah. They just, and apparently this is the practice which is kept since that time. That's make North Korean, this participation in North Korean media a very lucrative job, which people dream about, and of course, very few of them will corrupt this, this trust, etc., etc. Because what else would you wish? You are king of your own society.
We don't see many of them defecting to South Korea.
Exactly.
So last question. So try to bring this all back to broader North Korean cultural production. What do we learn from how the media has changed under Kim Jong Un, and what can we say about the future of North Korean cultural production?
I think that they are developing. They are not as close from the world. It may be a rogue state. It may be, this isolated society. But this society is not as isolated as we can imagine. That what we can. I see now the trends of North Korean media. They are changing almost as quickly as the trends of today's media. When, for example, a few years ago, you could see some media pieces lasted for 5 minutes. Now it's just 2 minutes or 1 minute. It's just shorter and shorter and more dynamic and more colorful, and all these things are used. They're using all these techniques, and of course the media production as well. If you see look at North Korean contemporary, just today's made TV serials, you see that many of them carry strong approximation, resemblance with South Korean motifs, South Korean ways of production. You see them, how all the things are learned by, etc. So they are learners, they are ready to learn, they are quickly to learn, but it doesn't mean that at the same time they do not intend to discard the ideology, to discard the political system, etc. Everything is all these formal changes, all these formal things, they intend to support the system to make it more stable, more attractive, more aesthetically appealing, etc. So that's what I can say. There is no political liberalization, but lots of liberalization, lots of new renovations of the facade of North Korean media, North Korean culture.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming again on the podcast today, Tatiana Gabroussenko. We hope you'll come again and tell us more about changing North Korean culture and media.
Good, thank you.
Let me ask you this. You're listening to the NK News podcast, so you know more about North Korea than most. But how about the South? To really understand what's happening on the peninsula, you need to know about South Korea. And now you can, through our new Korea Pro news and analysis service. This is not your average news service. It's a thoroughly researched analysis of South Korea's politics, society, and economy from an international perspective. But you know what the cherry on top is? The absolute lack of commercial influences. No ads, no sponsored articles. It's just pure, objective analysis by a team of qualified specialists. And the best part? As a listener of this podcast, you get a 25% discount. All you have to do is use the coupon code PODCAST during your sign-up. So head over to koreapro.org/podcast and start your journey with Korea Pro. That's koreapro.org/podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our podcast episode for today. Our thanks go to Brian Betts and Alana Hill for facilitating this episode, and to our post-recording producer genius Gabby Magnuson, who cuts out all the extraneous noises, awkward silences, bodily functions, and fixes the audio levels. Thank you, and listen again next time.